Once you capitalize intangible capital, so intangible investment, then the idea is that they provide a contribution to productivity growth. And once you measure this contribution, what you observe is that in countries, in the advanced countries like the US or UK, they provide a relevant contribution to the labor productivity growth in the business sector. And especially in the US, the contribution is even higher than the contribution of tangible capital. So this implies that, of course, they provide a new and relevant picture of what can be the sources of growth in the business sector. So once you include the intangible capital in the sources of growth model, you can see that they are one of the main driver of growth in some of the advanced countries, and especially in the business sector. And this is relevant because then, once you include them in the picture, what you can see is that the GDP, so the gross domestic product, can be 5 to 10 percentage points higher as compared to when they are not capitalized. So this implies that they really provide a new picture of the sources of growth. The most important issue is that once they are included in the picture, also the contribution of other assets that have been analyzed in the past, like for example ICT, so the information and communication technology, and R&D itself, are changed. And the reason is that in very recent research studies that we are doing, we are observing that there are strong complementary effects between all these assets. So once intangibles are included into the picture, they interact both with ICT as well as with R&D. And what is interesting is the interaction especially with ICT. And the interest in this, it is very interesting since once they are included and once you look at the interactions between these assets, what you observe is that you need an extended framework to analyze productivity growth. And this leads to our second question. So what is relevant is also to disentangle the contribution of each intangible asset and to compare this contribution with the contribution of other possible complementary assets such as ICT. So if we look at the contributions, for example, of ICT, R&D and the non-R&D intangibles, where the R&D intangibles essentially refer to the economic competencies and where you can have, for example, organizational capital or brand equity and so on and so forth, then what you observe is that there is a very heterogeneous picture across the European countries. Because what we observe is that as far as the intensity of this type of investment across European countries as industries is rather heterogeneous. In which sense? If we, for example, we look at the intensity of ICT and non-R&D intangibles, we discover that the most advanced countries, like for example UK or Austria or the Netherlands, are very intensive in ICT and non-R&D intangibles in the services sectors more than in manufacturing. And the same is not true for what concerns the southern countries. In the southern countries, these two assets provide a very low contribution to productivity growth, and the services sectors are not so much intensive. While if we look at R&D, what we observe is that typically the manufacturing sector is essentially R&D intensive more than the services, and also in this particular case, the northern countries of Europe are more intensive than the southern countries. But when we look at the contribution to productivity growth, what we discover is that these three assets, ICT, R&D, and non-R&D intangibles, and particularly non-R&D intangible and ICT, provide a huge contribution to growth in the advanced economies. While this is not the case for the slow growing countries, like for example Italy and Spain, where if you want, the weight of the manufacturing sector is still higher as compared to the services sectors, but where really the intensity of this type of investment is rather lower as compared to the other advanced countries. At this stage of the SPINTAN project, what we have done until now has been to design the theoretical framework that will be essentially our starting point then for the second phase of the project, where we are going to measure in details the public sector intangibles. In few days there will be a paper by Carol Corrado, Jonathan Askell and myself, which will be essentially a draft paper illustrating the theoretical framework that I'm not going to illustrate now, of course. Anyway, at the same time, what we have done until now has been to screen all the available data sources for the European countries that we have in the project, and we have collected all the necessary information to provide a first set of measurement of the intangible investment in the public sector for a subset of intangible assets. Just to give you a few details, what we are going to release very soon, this will happen in December, we will release a time series starting from 1995 up to 2011 for four assets that are organizational capital, training, and architectural and engineering design and brand equity for the public sector in the European countries, for industries where the non-market where the non-market activity is more relevant. Then, I mean, and this is really the first step. At that time, so in December, we will be able also to provide some analytical, for sure, analysis. Sorry, some empirical analysis of this data, and to provide a first picture of the intensity of intangible in the public sector in the European countries. The first thing that we need really to do is to measure intangible investment correctly. And in order to do that, of course, we need to devote to the measurement of intangibles time and resources. And I think that this is really the first step, because if we do not measure them correctly, we will not be able then to provide sound policy implications and to, of course, have a clear picture of their role in the economies. So I think that first of all we need to measure them, so we need really to go into the details of the data collection, and if it's possible to put some effort in maybe designing new surveys in order to collect the new information that are not available today. And this is true both for the business sector as well as for the public sector, as we will discover in few months, once we will have the complete picture. And then, of course, once we will have collected all this information and we will have all the details, then we will be able to improve the measurement of intangible investment, and at that time we will really be able to provide to the policymakers relevant tools in order to design sound policy programs, especially in light of the Lisbon agenda, but also, the innovation agenda.